Happy birthday, Kong! 86 years ago this month, the most important film ever made was Unleashed. And I mean the most important film ever made. You look at almost everyone working in the film industry today across the world, not just here in America, across the world, their roots go all the way back to King Kong. Though now what we see are people inspired by people who were inspired by Kong, a third generation of people influenced by the giant ape. Everything from music score, sound design, staging, framing, lighting, and of course visual effects would be so far behind in today's world without this movie to thank. My guess is to be somewhere to be 15 to 20 years behind, in fact. Just imagine that today we'd be 15 to 20 years behind what we are now in terms of cinema. Even if Willis O'Brien was able to make Creation, I have no doubt that the film would have never been as much as a big splash as Kong. It certainly would have pushed the bar, but financially it probably would have just been remembered as another reimagining of The Lost World. Just because it's his birthday, I sat down with a large bowl of popcorn and watched the film again. And I couldn't help but watch in awe at Skull Island itself. Now, I've noticed this way back to even when I was first discovering Kong. Hell, the 2.5-hour documentary on the DVD is the first documentary I ever watched on how to make a movie. I would literally watch it and study it because this documentary basically shows you the ABCs of not only stop motion, but how traveling mats work, how composite shots work, rear screen projection, depth, foreground, sound design, everything. It taught me that filmmaking itself is an art, not just the movie itself. Then, of course, I saw Peter Jackson's remake, and, well, here I am today. But never have I actually done a video or podcast discussing what I would call the depth of Skull Island. In no other film ever have I ever seen a jungle, or even a set in general, with such detail and level of depth. I mean things in the foreground, middle, and background. Literal depth. I mean, of course, things are always going to have this to help sell the idea of there being depth on a 2D image. This was being done way back in the early 1900s. But I mean detail. When Jack Driscoll comes across the dead T-Rex, you don't need to see Kong moving the whole way in the background through the brush. You just need to see him in that opening. But O'Brien and his crew built the set in such a way that you do see Kong moving off-screen behind the brush. When we see the Stegosaurus moving left, we don't need to see him moving behind those trees. Or when he comes back around and comes from the right, him moving through the trees. A normal animator, or a normal effects person in general, would only show what is 100% necessary. But these guys, those beautiful, beautiful men, did it anyways. And it truly sells to the audience that yes, even today, that Skull Island is not just a set, but a living, breathing jungle. I mean, you even have birds animated flying up off the trees. O'Brien didn't need that, but he does. Or the waterfalls in the background, or some of the composited mist, but it's there. And that sells reality. And usually you just have 2 or 3 images composited together back then. But here we have 5, 6, 7, even 8 in one shot. Look at Kong's cave. That's just one shot. That wide shot is astonishing. People to this day don't know how they did that. You got 2 miniature rear screen projections with Anne and Driscoll, animated with Kong and the plesiosaur. You have the mud imposed into the foreground. You have the matte painting of the cave itself, the lake in the background. This is just one wide, and does more to establish an environment than dozens of insert shots. So many new techniques were literally invented with this movie to see the depth of Skull Island, creating images not only thought impossible, but thought would literally destroy the film. And because of O'Brien and his crew, he actually was able to patent all of these techniques. We use this stuff to this day, though with computer optics instead of literal miniatures or actual film. We use everything with digital. The same ideas, the same process still works. It's now just done in a computer. You know, it's actually really funny. And this goes into movie making in general, But if you look at a shot setup, just 1 foot to the right of where the camera is actually, where you plant it down, often it gives away what you're doing, and often makes you laugh. That certainly happens on my set. But with Kong, these vast jungles, the depth of these jungles, they're actually not that vast at all. And this is the basic setup O'Brien would see. And I mean, it's basic. It's the layered effect, in which O'Brien was inspired by the works of Gustave Doré. His art team would look at paintings by that artist and say, we're going to use that style, with dark foregrounds and really, really light backgrounds to establish a lighting layer, creating depth that isn't actually there. You have the camera shooting through a regular plane of glass. Then you have your animation set equipped with whatever is necessary. Then you have a surprisingly basic painting for a backdrop for the background. The backdrop would never be painted with great detail, only with basic shapes, shades, and placement. You just look through, if you needed something painted, you just look through the lens of your camera and see what needs to be put there. Same goes for the miniature set itself. You need a tree, they made one. Usually out of dowels and clay, and they would actually either cut stuff out of, copper to make the palm trees, or they'd actually get regular plants to insert in there. The miniature set itself is actually surprisingly bare if you really look at it. Only the basics and things Kong could interact with would actually be put down. Often the animation table wouldn't be on one table, but multiple, including multiple planes of glass where they would actually paint things on. And basically, this would create a more three-dimensional space. And the genius of having little on the miniature set table was, well, you have multiple benefits here. One is the less you have on the set, the less you need to worry about messing with while animating. So basically, you don't accidentally bump into a tree and knock it over. And two, the less stuff you have built on the set, the less you need to light. These you can really focus your lights on very, very, very specific things. The result being some of the most beautifully lit and crafted images ever put to black and white film. And yes, if you shot this same style in color, a lot of the trickery would come out. But in black and white, my God, does it look beautiful. And I know it works beautiful because I did this on my first film, Gyla the Invincible. Then there is that plane of glass you shoot through in the foreground. Not only did they paint it with dark paints and such, but often they would stomp on grass or even build a couple of things and place it in front of the glass for adding some shades, some textures, not just black, because that's what it would look like on film. It's not just a black foreground element. There are shades of gray, which were often real things glued or pinned in front of the glass, right by the lens of the camera. You look at this process from the side, you laugh at how silly it looks. This is supposed to be Skull Island? This is ridiculous. Then you look at it through the lens, and there it is. A fully realized, living, breathing jungle with vines, trees, and most importantly, depth like nothing we've ever seen before. Not even in Willis O'Brien's earlier works, such as The Lost World, which has a lot of depth to it. But compare the jungles of The Lost World to the jungles of Skull Island, there's no comparison which one is better. And that's not just because of technological advances. With this, I'd say this is the basics of filmmaking. But then you realize this wasn't a large-scale set. These were miniatures and paintings. You'd never know Skull Island wasn't much of a large-scale set whatsoever, or scale to fit an 18-inch tall puppet. You'd never guess that looking at the film. Compare that to like The Wizard of Oz, made several years later, where they used many of the same techniques on that. Kong blows Wizard of Oz out of the water. Now, granted, you're comparing two very different mediums, but the techniques being the same, that's where I like to compare them. Now let's see, that alone just makes me giddy. I don't know if you can tell me talking about this, but I love this subject, and I'm actually giddy because of how cool this all is. But then you look at the innovative ways O'Brien and his team incorporated live-action elements into Skull Island's jungle. Believe it or not, the one that I find the coolest is actually the simplest way. It's just simple rear screen projection, something established way back even before the 19-teens. But yeah, it's used to great effect here. Usually this is done with cars and stuff, and you'd see that all way, even throughout the 80s you'd see it. It's a simple rear screen projection. It's exactly what it sounds like. And of course, the scene that I think of the most in King Kong isn't so much the fight with the T-Rex and Ann and Kong, but actually the Stegosaurus attack, which gives me chills to this day, the level of detail there. That was a giant set with actors on it, shot in what is essentially a movie theater. But then comes the stop-motion dinosaur, the birds, and even the camera movement of the camera shooting the plane. And you have the camera pushing in, it pans, it tilts. Something you could never do with mats back then, or even the optical printer, which, by the way, was innovated making this movie. Or at least in a way the shot moves in its camera. Not only did O'Brien animate using the layered effect, as we mentioned before, you got a layered effect on top of a layered effect here with the actual built-up, live-sized jungle set that the actors are on, depth on top of depth. And this helps the actors, too. They see that Stegosaurus and sees that T-Rex fighting Kong. They can time themselves, act based off of this animation. Usually it's the other way around, with actors using their imagination and the animator, animating based off of the actors, i.e. Ray Harryhausen later on. But here, O'Brien animated his puppets first. Our actors aren't using their imagination. They are reacting to, for all intents and purposes, a living, breathing Stegosaurus or a T-Rex. You think that'd be all, but that's not it. I mentioned it before, and I alluded to it before in this podcast, but using reversed rear screen projection was so cool. Having the live screen shots of Anne getting her clothes peeled off, or Kong reaching for Driscoll just after the log sequence, literally not just... That's literally just all in camera. That's all on a miniature set. He had a small screen projecting the actors from a 90-degree angle, then bounced from a mirror to project them onto the animation set itself. That way, the puppet didn't create a shadow of any kind. That just blows my mind. That's so innovative, and yet so simple. Then the set builders could literally build around the screen to properly make it blend in with the miniature set itself. Funny how sometimes you can actually see the puppet pushing in on the screen. You look at the scene with Driscoll stabbing Kong's hand, several frames you can actually see the puppet pushing in on the screen, and it's actually funny. But like seeing the wires on a Tsuburaya effect shot, for example, look at the UFOs in Battle in Outer Space, the wires holding up Santa's sleigh in a Rankin Bass special, something like that, I find it all the more endearing and just plain old cool. I'd go like, oh, that's how they did it? Oh, look at that! I'm like a kid in a candy shop, and hopefully that's coming across in my voice here, because I think this stuff is really fucking cool. But like Kong, moving a frame at a time, so would they move the projector film frame. And the result was it was intensive trickery. Multiple layers of live-action elements and puppetry, the creation of depth is created here. You can have them moving behind the log. You can have Jack Driscoll behind Kong, in front of Kong, everything like that. This is so fucking cool. It must have been so hot on those sets, because it gets hot on a film set, period. Just imagine having all those lights on, having all those projectors on and everything. I couldn't imagine how hot it was. And apparently they actually had fans blowing directly into the projectors, something they created for this movie to keep the film from actually burning. That's pretty fucking cool in itself. And I can't think of any other film ever made, period, with not only something so ingenious, but also featuring such depth. So innovatively. So in the end, happy birthday, Kong, and keep inspiring, because you've certainly inspired me, and I know you've inspired others. In the end, go on Facebook, like AN Productions, follow our website, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. In the end, this is Adam Noyce of AN Productions saying sayonara.